Well, I went to the same primary school as Catherine Mansfield, which was Karori Normal. So I found out, as a little kid, about 8 or 9, that she'd been at the school, and there was a bird bath in the lower playground, which commemorated the fact that she was at the school. She was there 50 years or so before me, 50 or 60 years before me. And she was writing about the school. She was writing about Karori and writing about Thorndon, because the family lived in both Karori and Thorndon. This is all before she became a world famous writer, So she wrote about those places I knew, She wrote about what it was like growing up in Karori and walking through the fields at that time, because there weren't many houses, pretty muddy tracks she was walking along, walking to school with her sisters and stuff like that, talking about the birds that she'd hear, all the sort of pigs that were being farmed down the road, which stunk a lot. So she was talking about that stuff, and it was very interesting that, she's such a good writer too, She's got great descriptive abilities, She knows how to kind of catch she sort of, to catch that beautiful image, she writes about the wind, because she grew up with the wind in her face, blowing her around on the way to school, And she's got this great thing that she says in one of her short stories, She says, "The wind roared up the street like a thin dog." And it's quite a powerful idea, you sort of, and she kind of makes you think, wow, I hadn't thought of that, but it's a very interesting way to see it. So I was interested, and so I got this opportunity to write about her in 2017, because I'm a historian, and I'm saying far too much here, far much more than you need. But I was interested to find out about why the family moved from Thorndon, where she was born, up to Karori. And I was following a theory of mine that the family moved because there was a lot of bad infectious disease in the water at the time, some nasty stuff in the water, which was sort of polluting the water. And her baby sister died in the house down in Thorndon, and it was a thing called typhoid, and it was from this nasty stuff in the water. So they were getting out of Thorndon because it wasn't a very safe water supply, So they moved away, and then the council fixed the water. They spent tens of millions fixing up the water, so the water was safe to drink. But no one ever really knew that that's why the family moved. That they were not moving because they just wanted to go out, not to the country up to Karori. They were moving because they were scared.
So when she started writing about things she saw, birds, whatever, was it her relationship with those things, or did she see some other magical world in it?
Well, she had this fantastic garden way down the end of Karori by the park there, and I think as she was a 4 or 5 year old, it had big gardens and trees and cattle and ducks and a lovely river, and she got lost in that world, so it was like a little kingdom for a kid. They made mud pies, with their brothers and sisters sitting around in the sunshine and going for walks up, around the place and exploring, and it was their little kingdom for them, so she wrote about that. It was a very safe, secure place, sunny, and it was a good time, I think they were the best years of her life. So she writes about herself and her sisters and her brother, and this old guy there's a guy called Pat, and he kind of mowed the lawns and looked after the horses, because they had horses and stuff. And he was a guy who she liked, who was from Ireland, who had lots of stories. He was a storyteller, So yes, she wrote about him.
Was her story form or format at that time, were they basically short stories? And I mean, it could be anything from sort of 5 to 25 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I think she just felt that they were a nice, manageable amount, like in a way a short story is a bit like a poem, a bit of an oversized poem, They're very beautifully crafted, they've got you're basically, the rule about a short story is that you can read them in one sitting, And that's great these days when we're all busy, you know. You can read them, you know, it's really 2 or 3 pages, you know. So I think she liked that format. She was able to kind of say what she wanted to say in a very disciplined way. And in some ways, because she's so good at it, she could say a whole lot that might take other people 50 pages. She could say it in 2.
Our theme for this year, for the short story competition, is the wind. And you talked of her relationship and interest in the wind. So it obviously started as a young child. Tell us a wee bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't that keen on the wind, you know. Like I say, she's got that line how, you know, the wind ran in the street like a thin dog, you know. That's pretty amazing. I mean, she first encountered the wind as a kid on Tinakori Road growing up, you know. The family lived above the harbour there, and there was some very wild gales, you know. So one of her stories she writes about the wind in a pretty amazing way. She says, "With the dark crept the wind, snuffling and howling. The windows of the empty house shook. A creaking came from the walls and floors. A piece of iron loose on the roof banged forlornly. She was frightened. But it was just behind her, waiting at the door, at the head of the stairs, at the bottom of the stairs, hiding in the passage, ready to dart out of the back door." So she was quite freaked out by the wind, you know, at that time. She's writing about that as a very little girl, you know. But she also loved the wind too, you know. She felt that it was energizing and invigorating, and it was also keeping the air kind of nice and clean, you know. So she also liked it as well, you know. So there's good sides to it. And there's a lovely story that it's really worth having a look at. One of her famous stories called "The Wind Blows," and that's a story about her and her younger brother, who she called Chummy, or sometimes Bogey, that funny name she had for him. And in the story, she and her brother are walking along on the waterfront, on the Wellington waterfront together in a really big gale. And she's just got this line here. And this line is actually out there by Te Papa on a big slab. Sometimes if you walk down by Te Papa, you can see it on the wharf there. And it goes like this: "They cannot walk fast enough. Their heads bent, their legs just touching. They stride like one eager person through the town, down the asphalt zigzag where the fennel grows wild, and out onto the esplanade. It is dusky, just getting dusky. The wind is so strong they have to fight their way through it, rocking like 2 old drunkards. All the poor little Pahutakawas on the esplanade are bent to the ground."
Oh, that is truly fabulous. I can picture that. And
I know. She's so visual. You can see it, man.
Yeah. You don't need somebody to make it into a film. Did she take that idea that, you know, her love of the wind as from her childhood into her latter years, like when she went to France?
Well, in fact, I think by the time she was a bit older, she felt that, you know, like the wind was just something, you know, she didn't encounter the wind that much in France. I mean, in fact, when she was in France and in the south of France, being back in the wind helped take her back to New Zealand. In some ways, the work I've been doing lately, I've been looking at how windy some of the places she lived were in the south of France. And I think these helped her reconnect to Wellington, to reconnect to her childhood. You know, that wild weather, it was so familiar, it was in her blood, it was under her skin. So I think that helped her write these wonderful stories about New Zealand in France. Wonderful stories like "The Wind Blows," but also "At the Bay," set over in Eastbourne. That beautiful story she writes about her being at the beach in the summer.
For writers just starting out, or been at it maybe for a little while, and are entering this competition, just any thoughts that maybe if you're starting out, you know, what should they be doing? Writing everything down in a notebook, or is it just write?
I think really writing is rewriting. So it's a lot of work. You have to, but if you've got some good ideas, you know, and you're kind of thinking about what's around you and observing what's around you and thinking, that's quite interesting to me. You know, maybe that's something I could write about. So something that you feel that you can connect to, and then you try and find the words for it, you know. And it's going to take time. You're going to have to keep rewriting, you know, for a little bit, you know. But that's okay. It does get better. and it's just, you just have to kind of stick with it, really. That's been my experience, you know. So just keep on going, you know, give it a go, even though at times it feels like you're not making progress. And I mean, I think the really great writers that we have in the world are people who, you don't do it the first time. You're going to have to keep at it, polishing and polishing, you know. And it's like any, you know, precious stone. It does get more and more beautiful the more work that you put into it.